We shall now move on to the final panel discussion of the day on the topic Developed in India for the World. We welcome panel which includes Mr. Nikhil Kamath, co-founder and CIO Zerodha and TrueBacon. Mr. Nikhil started equity trading at the age of 17, having dropped out of school 2 years earlier to play chess for India. He largely focused on the emerging derivatives and commodity sectors. He co-founded Kamath Associates at the age of 19 to manage high net worth individual portfolios in the public market space before co-founding Zerodha with his brother Nitin in 2010 at the age of 23. We also have with us Mr. Alok Bansal, co-founder and group CFO, PolicyBazaar.com. Mr. Alok Bansal is the co-founder and CFO of PolicyBazaar.com, group of companies that owns India's leading insurtech brand, PolicyBazaar.com, leading lending marketplace, PaisaBazaar.com, and new health tech venture, DocPrime.com. He heads various functions, including corporate finance and controllership, tax, treasury, strategic planning, and analytics. We also have with us Mr. Vaibhav Domkundwar, CEO, Better Capital. Mr. Vaibhav is the founder and CEO of Better, an early stage venture firm with 60 plus investments in category defining companies like Open, Khatabook, Bijak, Jupiter, Yulu, and many others. Prior to Better, Mr. Vaibhav was the co-founder of Roamware, a leading mobile roaming solutions with a global customer base. We also have with us Mr. Amrit Acharya, CEO and co-founder, Setwork. Mr. Acharya is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Setwork. He brings in diverse experience in the field of technology, manufacturing, and investments gathered in his previous stints with noted companies such as ITC Limited in India and McKinsey in the US. We also have with us in this panel discussion Mr. Ashish Sharma, MD and CEO at Innoven Capital India Private Limited. Mr. Ashish Sharma joined Innoven in October 2017 and brought a rich experience of 20 years in the industry. Prior to joining Innoven, he was the president and CEO of GE Capital India, where his responsibilities included oversight of GE Capital's activities in India through its 100% owned finance companies and credit card JV's SBI cards. This session will be moderated by Ms. Ritu Maria. Over to you, ma'am.
This is a fantastic panel that I'm leading today. As you say, as I say that you always have to save the best for the last, and what a wonderful panel we have. On one hand, I have these founders, which includes Nikhil, Alok, and Amrit, who have totally set the precedence for new growth in India, and they're doing some wonderful work, which we're going to share with you shortly. And also then we have our funds, Ashish, who is leading Innoven with, and is going to talk about venture debt and Make in India, and also Vaibhav from Better Capital, who is going to talk about early stage funding companies. And so between all of them, they represent what I typically call the new India, and they would talk about how funds and startups today are working together to create the big startups of tomorrow. Ashish and Vaibhav, of course, have the lenses to identify who are going to be tomorrow's big startups right here today. To understand, where the growth will come from. And all of them together, they have this mission, which is really make in India and make for the world. Of course, we have been able to establish in these last few years the goodwill of Indian startups globally, wherein now we know that the Indian innovation is something that the entire world looks forward to. And what is now important is that how we are going to attract the global investments, global talent, and also be able to retain our own talent back at home and not have them go outside India. So see that our own startups are now able to grow, and at the same time also see that some of the Indian talent which is outside India or even global experts, how we can get them in India to really accomplish this mission to the best of the capabilities, and at the same time make of the best of the resources that we have here today in India with us for creating the new startups in the new age world that we are looking at. And as the Prime Minister Modi has totally set a vision for it. So welcome to the entire panel, and it's great to have you all here with us today at Startup 2021. And let me possibly start with Alok here. Alok, it's wonderful to have you here with us from Policy Bazaar. And I see that you're doing some great work out there in terms of how you built Policy Bazaar and how you brought insurance into mainstream life and helped everybody realize the importance of insurance. So particularly from your lenses, what has changed during 2020? I know the pandemic has brought a very different kind of insurance trends in the industry today. It is life insurance, health insurance, business insurance, where small and medium businesses who never thought insurance was important have started realizing the importance. So what has changed for the business particularly, and for you in particular, in terms of how you were always looking at customers and customer acquisition?
Sure. Thanks, Ritu. And it's a pleasure to be part of the panel. Uh, the way last 12 months have gone, it's obviously been a very challenging period for everyone, including us. But we happen to be in an industry which is more service oriented, so no real physical interaction required. So we could manage, obviously, in a little better way compared to a lot of other industries which went through tough times. Specifically, if we look at insurance, health insurance and pure term insurance got a very big tailwind because of the whole COVID and all the conversation which we all continue to get from social media and WhatsApp. So I would say there are two different parts. One, protection became more mainstream and a lot more people started thinking about it. So top of the funnel for us obviously increased. But along with that, we could see that the industry moved very, very quickly to adopt a lot more tech as part of the whole buying process for consumers. So, earlier when you buy a health insurance, you would have to go for a physical medical test. And now practically every company is able to do a tele underwriting. So, if a doctor talks to you 5 minutes and signs off and gets the policy issued, it is removing a very, very, very big friction from the whole buying process itself. I think uh, so that sort of adoption, which would have usually taken 2 years or 3 years, sort of got accelerated. And health insurance, I think, is a very large opportunity. And if a lot of customers start to believe that this is a very core part of their financial planning, it will help, especially the middle class India. When you talk about small businesses and shopkeepers and that segment, uh, what we see is, the P&L of that person and the P&L of the business actually is not different. So you can't really separate them out. So if,
Sure.
God forbid, the family had to go through some tough times because of some health emergency or some, something happening to the primary job, uh, primary earner of the family, it will put the business also under undue risk. So when you look at that particular segment, it's worthwhile to look at how can we cover the business for some unforeseen risk, but side by side, how can we cover the promoter of that particular business and their family so that the business doesn't have to suffer in case something unforeseen happens. Uh, so that sort of thinking, I think, has got accelerated. We are also seeing industry willing to adopt a lot more data as part of their product thinking now. Unfortunately, the way industry had evolved over so many decades, the focus was not as much on the consumer segmentation as it was on how to distribute the product.
Sure.
But with a lot more data available in the sort of current scenario where a lot more pull customers are coming in, I think that's a very big advantage for industry players to now come up with smaller segments of customers and the right product for those customer segments. So all in all, I think the power of data and tech will play out a very big role over the next few years. And COVID definitely provided that sort of tailwind. So broadly, it wasn't something we would complain about in terms of how the business has fared for us.
Yeah, but how has digitization really helped the insurance sector? I know for sure there used to be a lot of red tape in the insurance sector at one point of time, wherein the person who took the policy was never sure that they could actually make or use the policy when the timing was right. How do you think all those metrics have changed, particularly in the last couple of years?
See, I think we have to go segment by segment here. Actually, the way we are looking at few segments which are becoming so simple to buy, things like motor insurance and two-wheeler insurance. You don't need to talk to anyone. You don't need to, meet anyone. You just through the transaction on your own, very similar to say buying an air ticket now. In fact, even if your car policy is expired and it's a breaking case where earlier you will see a surveyor coming to you, today you don't need to have that surveyor. Today you can take a video within the app and the insurance company can issue the policy based on those videos. Now the good part is because this solution can actually work not just for the issuance of the policy, but can also be used for the claims. Over last 1 year, a lot of insurance companies have started to use a video inspection, which customers does on their own time and leisure to pay the claims. So for most of the companies now, either it's a cashless or if it's not a cashless, you can take a video and up to 1 lakh rupees, the claim can be paid just based on the video. So yes, it has helped customers a lot more in terms of navigating the process, which used to be a black box. Uh, I think the confidence in the industry is sort of coming back. It will take time. This is not something which will happen overnight, but the whole trust on the industry that yes, the product which is being provided to me, first of all, meets my needs, and secondly, it will help me when I'll require that claim. Eventually, what you're buying is a promise. So, if that promise you keep on paying money every year and the other party doesn't keep the end of the bargain, it's a totally useless product otherwise.
Correct.
But I think that trust is coming back in terms of what customers have been looking for as product, and their expectations, to be frank, is not set by the insurance industry. The expectation of the online and a full consumer is set by Flipkart and Zomato and Make My Trip of the world. So the industry has to move to meet those expectations, and I think somewhere we are seeing very positive trend overall across the industry on these things.
Sure. No, I think I do see the whole processing in the trust factor is now going many notches up. So let me come back to you once again, but then I'm going to move to Amrit today, who is the founder of Zetwork. And I see that there are big opportunities that Amrit is sort of making the most of, in particularly in the B2B manufacturing space. So Amrit, we would love to know from you that how do you see the MSMEs who are known for their traditional mindset and, not sort of being able to, try as may, I know big tech companies have been trying to make sense about technology to them for the longest time. And yet here you have with Zetwork, where you're helping them to find orders, where you're helping them to find business online through Zetwork. So what is it that has changed MSMEs during particularly this last 1.5 year? And where do you see MSMEs going forward will be using this opportunity? Who is it that you are disrupting at Zetwork? I know the discoverability for MSMEs to get their business orders, get manufacturing orders was largely coming out of big trade shows that were happening in Europe and USA and lots of other places. So are you trying to sort of disrupt their efficacy and see that, they are able to now procure more online orders from OEMs and others?
Yeah, no, Ritu, it's a great question. Like, maybe let me step back and share what we do. I mean, we fundamentally bring together the fragmented manufacturing ecosystem under a single kind of umbrella, where we try and maximize visibility, capacity, and quality for the entire ecosystem. I think the challenge in this industry has been, in India, if you look at overall manufacturing and any other sector, there are lots of SMEs. There are very few large companies. So the role Zetwork plays to a large company, let's say like a GE or L&T Tata, some of these who are our customers, is how can we offer that large volumes and that flexibility of a small supplier, of a large supplier by working with lots of small suppliers. So instead of building lots of mega factories, which is what lots of economies have done, can we offer that same experience to you through lots of micro factories? And the trend, if you see any industry, it's moving from building one part, millions of pieces. Today, the consumer trends are changing so rapidly. I want lots of different SKUs. I want something blue in color. I want something red in color. If you take a consumer goods industry, so the trend is also moving in the manufacturing space to how can I have shorter milk runs, but a more variety of milk runs. And in this scenario, MSMEs ultimately have no option but to be more agile. They have to be more flexible. They have to respond to the needs of the market faster. And often what we see, by just by the role we play as a platform, we know our suppliers better than our suppliers know themselves, because we have a view of the entire market, and that's the key message, right? Especially in the last 1 year, where there's been a lot of supply chain shocks across industries. If you take core industry verticals, consumer electronics, apparel, any industry you take, most of the regular business flow got heavily disrupted. But it also presented an opportunity where previously buyers needed to physically visit these suppliers before taking a purchase decision. They wanted to inspect the factory. They wanted to see how good the supply was. And even post ordering, they wanted to visit these suppliers regularly to make sure the projects are moving on time. Today, through the solution we have innovated, you can do all of that digitally, starting from digital selection of supply and remote project management from start till still end. And we see that the suppliers who kind of participated in our journey, the small SMEs, they see a 20% uplift in revenues. So that's the message from our side. I think this is here to stay. The nature of business, and it's not just limited to India. We see a lot of new companies explore India for the first time because there were global disruption to supply chain as well. It is not just limited to the Indian small manufacturer. Companies who were buying from China or East Asia suddenly had supply chain shocks there. And most companies have decided that they can't have a single source from where they buy. And hence India today, in our lifetime, we see that it is a decade-long trend that is starting today, where a lot of new supply creation will happen. And the suppliers will be even more ahead, will be those who adopt technology.
Sure. No, I think that's a great thought that you have put together in place, and I only wish you well to see that the whole growth is big and large in this. Nikhil, thank you for joining us here today at Startup 2021. You're already being called the Robin Hood of India, and what really is remarkable about the journey that Zerodha and now True Beacon is also doing is the fact that you did not go the conventional way of raising capital and then building up a business, but rather built up a profitable business. Now, what are your thoughts on this about today's startups? They want to raise capital. They want to see that that they have a backing of capital before they can scale X their business ideas. What would you tell them to, if they're not able to raise capital, what is it that they should be doing in order to grow? Largely would love to know about, how you've been able to break that conventional sort of approach to not raise capital and yet grow your business to a very large extent.
Hi, Ritu. So I think it depends on the industry that you're in. There are many industries out there where bootstrapping is a genuine option, especially for us in the broking space, because the ecosystem we market to is so small. Only about 1.5% of the country has financial exposure, and they've ever traded in the stock markets. It does not make sense for us to market like an e-commerce platform might, because if we put out an ad to 100 people, it's applicable only to 1 or 2. So for businesses like us, maybe spending a lot of money acquiring a customer is not the right thing to do. But for very many businesses out there where they're dependent on getting the word out there, and they cater to a large portion of our population, the answer might be something else altogether. So I don't think it's a one-fit solution for everybody. What worked for us because of the timing of it all when we started and the ecosystem at that point. But I would not like to condone that same approach to people in different sectors attempting different products.
Sure. And today only, despite the fact that the market looks very big, it's still true that only very few Indians are using trading as a business channel, and they are sort of interested or invested into the investing process, I would say. So how are you trying to sort of get more Indians on board to look at it as a great business opportunity, and particularly now that online making it so much simpler? What is it, or how are you encouraging more people to come on board? Would you like to see a good part of India being a trader?
Yeah. Well, definitely. Anything that benefits us essentially is good for us, right? I mean, no reason not to want that. I think education is the only way. I think our system of pedagogy is flawed to a certain extent. We spend 15 years training people on how to get a degree and get a job and earn a wage, but we don't spend any time teaching them how to manage that money when they eventually get a job. So a lot has to change, not just once somebody has gone to college, but much earlier in life. I think no reason why financial management should not be a part of middle school curriculum, stuff like that. we've made some attempts at this. We kind of like, put out a few books called Rupee Tales, which cater to the 7 to 10, 11-year kind of audience, where we tried to teach financial literacy a
Sure.
lot sooner. But I think education is probably the only way. Right now, we have a market where the interest rate cycle has largely been down. Uh, Bank FDs no longer, kind of like even supersede what inflation is in the country. And the fact that the real estate ecosystem has plateaued for the last decade or two, and rental yields are like, at 2.5% in India on residential, there is a natural case to be made for why more people should invest in equity. So that's working in our favor, and that 1.5% is going up quickly. But outside of all of that, I think education at an earlier age is probably the solution for this.
Sure. And also, I mean, particularly when it comes to investing and online investing, it's all about really speed and trying to match up the traders' interest to sort of see that how they can be given a world which is absolutely glitch free. And so, how are you investing in the business to ensure that they're absolutely able to match the speed that the investors or the traders, they're not losing money because of any glitches that might happen technically, or just making the system more robust to ensure that everybody is on the same page and that everybody is able to achieve the end purpose.
So, Ritu, like us, in fact, most businesses in the fintech industry, we don't work in isolation. We are kind of like dependent on so much to, not have any downtime. We need to make sure, say, an Airtel or a Reliance's lines do not go down. We need to make sure the feeds from the exchange, they come on a different pipe. You get a certain amount of messages every second. So these are things you can't really build redundancies for. Sure, you can go out and get, 5 lines or 10 lines or 20 different lines. But each time A goes down, by the time B comes up, there will be some kind of lag in between. So the idea is not to have zero downtime. Uh, we will have downtime, as will every other broker or bank or fintech company, or everybody has these issues. I think the only thing we can try and control here is to have lesser downtime than any of our peers. And we can do that by, being more robust and, essentially paying for more backups and better infra, which we're doing. But when you look at it internationally, even, everybody from a Facebook to Google to Amazon, everybody does have downtime. I
Sure.
think that's an intrinsic side effect of technology, that you will have issues that crop up every now and then. But I think we endeavor and we continue to strive to reduce that downtime to the largest extent possible by building these redundancies like we have over the last decade.
Absolutely. And is Zerodha and now ready to go global? Are you looking to
Mm,
pan out of India to see what other markets you want to go to?
We've been considering it for a long time, and I think some of what has happened around Gift City in Gujarat has made it slightly simpler for incumbent business in India to kind of, cater to a foreign audience. They've, rationalized taxation and done a bunch of other things which will help. When we will actually do it is, very hard to call. I would not be able to put a certain timeline on it, but definitely the intention is to do that at some point of time.
Sure, and absolutely, we're looking forward to, just like you built a remarkable story in India, we love to see you doing it outside India as well. And I think your platform is absolutely ready for it. So let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Ashish. Ashish, of course, is the managing director of Innovin Capital. And, in a country which is so sort of excited and so, I would say, sure that they want to raise capital, it's one areas that gets less importance is venture debt. But I think today for startups, it's a good time to think that they may want to raise or not dilute their equity, but to be able to raise debt so that they can now grow their business by taking money and then returning money as it goes. So Ashish, do you think that the startup ecosystem is ready for venture capital versus venture debt, or do you think it's always going to be venture capital plus venture debt?
Yeah, I mean, both these sources of capital are complementary. So unless you have a business like what Nikhil has built, which is profitable from day one, chances are you need to raise equity to attract debt, because essentially, I mean, on your capital structure, the venture debt is lesser risk and lesser return expectation. So venture debt would come in once there is some level of validation, the business has put some runs on the board, there's some level of equity, and as they continue to become bigger, their balance sheets and their capital structure has more capacity to add more debt and service that debt. So that's one point. So it's never kind of one versus the other. Both of them go hand in hand on the capital structure. The goal here being at a very high level theory is to optimize your weighted average cost of capital, because the cost of equity is obviously very high, and it leads to fairly high dilution, which in a company that has a good outcome, I mean, even a few percentage points can make a difference in the long run. So largely you want to reduce your weighted average cost of capital. And then there are a bunch of other use cases where essentially you're trying to get a bit more runway before you do your next fundraise, hopefully at a higher valuation, working capital and capital expenditure where you don't want your, high cost equity capital to get tied up. There are things like you may want to clean up your cap table and do a buyback, use venture debt to do a buyback of your early cap table, right? Rather than try to get a secondary done. Acquisitions. So we are seeing a few use cases where companies are taking venture debt as a part of their overall acquisition finance package. So it's become quite prevalent, and I think still early days, but a lot of very large companies we have been fortunate to work with. So it's becoming quite prevalent, and most founders are starting to look at venture debt as they think about raising capital in addition to equity, which will continue to remain the primary source of capital.
Absolutely. And do you think that with the Make in India narrative that we have in manufacturing, a big sort of go-to now for startups to explore, do you think the venture debt might find more resonance there?
See, Make in India and venture debt, I don't know. I mean, like essentially what I would say on a different note is, there are a lot of Indian companies that have global aspirations. Some of them are already global, but a lot of them, as they're kind of thinking through like a growth playbook over the next 2 to 3 years, they're looking at, I think enterprise software has been a success story. Yeah. I mean, if you go back 30 years back, I mean, really it was all about labor arbitrage, right? The IT and ITES, and I'm not kind of demeaning it. I mean, but the primary thesis was labor arbitrage, and there was great execution and vision, to some of these companies that came in. But I think over the last probably 5-7 years, I think enterprise software, I think the founders do have big vision. They know what they're building for. There are already playbooks available, investors available who can help them with their go-to-market and kind of put runs on the board and ramp up and scale up. I think outside of that, we do have limited, great examples. So I would like to see a lot more of Indian companies that are building for the globe. I mean, like we have a few companies maybe in the deep tech space that have done a good job. But overall, I think it's kind of glass half full. Some good progress, but I think over the next 5 to 10 years, you are going to see a lot more Indian startups, having the ambition to at least go to certain geographies and take on some of the incumbents there.
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's only just started, which is, obviously with UAE being one of the first territories everybody sort of wants to go into. Do you think, particularly when startups will start looking at more, they will have more global visions, and they will have at least the first time when they want to set out of their own country, and they might need capital for it. Do you think they're likely to go more for venture debt instead of venture capital for such missions?
So we definitely, one of the unique things given our global footprint is we are able to provide, companies that have, let's say, global operations, could be 100% subsidiaries or a holding company outside. We are able to provide them some dollar financing as well. And frankly, equity is available, in dollars anyway. So capital is not a constraint. I mean, if there is one thing that is in abundance today, that is capital and liquidity. I think it's just a question of ambition and good, strong entrepreneurs who are thinking big. I mean, capital to some extent, in my mind, has been commoditized.
Yeah.
So it's about ideas and I mean, what can you do with that capital, and can you build a sustainable business? That's going to be competitive not only in India, but would be a gold standard in any geography you compete in.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And I think that is what we want to see, more capital riding behind startups so that this kind of growth happens. I was saying it in the morning that there are just about 35,000 registered startups in India, while there are about 6 lakh SMEs in India. So imagine, there's just so much more that needs to be done in the startup space. It's only just started. And with capital riding behind them, they can certainly achieve those kind of growth and the numbers that we really want to see coming up in this revolutionary side. Vaibhav, I'm going to come to you. Better Capital, of course, operates both in India as well as in Silicon Valley. So what are the key learnings that today Indian startups can take from Silicon Valley startups, according to you? Because for every startup that is started in India, there is always some kind of background, or there is some kind of inspiration that is always coming from the Silicon Valley side, whether it is from the idea side or whether it is from the way things need to be operating from that side. So what is it today in today's climate that Indian entrepreneurs need to be looking at in the Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I think, Ritu, thanks for having me here. And a great question, right? Because I think in some ways I've spent about 16 years in the Valley. My growing up as an entrepreneur happened there. So there's a lot of that DNA that helps me to help our founders here as we invest in the early stages, right? Now, look, I think Silicon Valley for the longest time, because of the great flywheel that started decades ago, continues to essentially have the best talent. And because of that best talent, they continue to compound the knowledge that they have to build an idea from scratch into multi-billion-dollar companies, right? So if you look at it as an outsider, if I'm in India today, what I see is that there is a big knowledge arbitrage that is the problem, right? So that is why Silicon Valley keeps winning in terms of creating the next generation of really large and innovative companies, right? So let's put that as one side. Now, if you look at India, what happened, and I think Ashish mentioned a little bit of this, right, in terms of how our technology industry was largely a labor arbitrage focused industry. Now, what happened in that, and again, with due respect to that complete generation, what happened is that we lost out on thinking first principles to do innovation in the first place, right? That coupled with sort of just infrastructure, right? So if you look at sort of the early VCs, global VCs started in India, I guess middle 2000s or something like that. But from then until I think 2015, it was a really tough ride for everybody. And the primary reason was just how undigitized the country was, right? So I think we had two big things happen over the last 3 years. One is, I think, Jio, that essentially just put smart devices that are connected with cheap data connections in the hands of millions of users, right? And when you couple that with what COVID brought to us, right? Obviously, a lot of downsides, but the big upside was digitization just kind of got the biggest shot it could ever get, right? And for a country that was geo-ready, right? I don't know what would have happened to our country if if we were not data ready when COVID hit, right? So a data ready country with COVID led to just massive digitization, right? So now it feels like, so if 2012, I mean, there are so many founders who started that time and struggled to build companies because the infrastructure, we were just not ready, right? Now, with that background, let's go back to what worked for Silicon Valley, right? What worked for Silicon Valley was they always had an ecosystem of buyers for whom you could build B2B and B2C companies. Today, in 2021, we are there, right? We have a local ecosystem of buyers and a digitized country to build for. And we have a decade of first generation of entrepreneurs or people who worked for those entrepreneurs to now come out and start companies. So, when COVID hit, as an investor, one of the things that I felt was we might actually see some of the best teams who will leave larger companies and start new ones. And that's exactly what has happened. And that's why you see the pace of deals in early stage has been unprecedented in the last 6 months, because the quality is just out of range from what we've all seen earlier, right? So we have great teams, a market that's ready, and a market that is digitizing faster than ever before, right? So now with this fabric, I think we can not only build for the world, but we can actually take lessons from the valley and apply here wherever applicable, right? So I think that's kind of the fabric I wanted to lay out as context for your question, right? And now I think coming back to your specific question of what can we take from the valley. So I think the mistake would be that we take everything the way it is, correct? The right thing would be to understand what sort of a knowledge arbitrage is benefiting companies who are building in the valley, and what can we take away from that to build from India, for India, or for the world, right? And the biggest thing that at least I am investing in, that is what I mentor our founders for, is sort of building what I call as product first companies, right? So wherein, the first generation of companies in India were business first, right? So we said, okay, what are you doing? What are you selling? How are you making your money? Versus Silicon Valley is about what are you solving for? Are you solving for enough number of people? How much have you scaled it? And the money question comes much later, right? I think we are now, if you look at Khatabook and Teachment and Dukaan and many other companies, we are seeing sort of what I call as the 2.0 of India venture, which will build Silicon Valley-like companies, right? Yeah. From India, for India, and for the world, right? So I think the stage is set, the quality of teams is very high. Like Ashish mentioned, I think we have more capital. Public markets are at their all-time high. So, the value of money that people are investing is, perception is lower. So I think the money is flowing more easily. So I think this decade might be the decade that we've all been waiting for India venture.
Sure, absolutely. And, I think you're right that you just cannot take things the way they are, but you need to probably tinker with them to make them more friendly for the Indian market. That's good to know. Nikhil, are you there?
I am. Yeah, Ritu.
So, another interesting thing we like to know is that it's 2021 is being cited as the year of IPOs. So is it that Zerodha is also looking to do their own IPO and you would be hitting the stock exchange, albeit a bit differently this time?
No, Ritu, we don't have any plans as such. Definitely not in the next 2 or 3 years. No such intention.
And do you feel that particularly now so many startups are looking to do IPOs this year? It's already being announced in terms of some startups that are likely to go. Do you think that they're going to get a great reception for their IPO? And particularly they would become the stocks or the blue chip stocks of the country in the years to come?
Well, I think not. A lot of these companies are valued using a mechanism which traditional stock investors are not used to. A lot of them are not profitable. They don't have revenues at par with the other IT or the other pharma listed companies that we have. So it would be very tough to wager, a guess and figure out which one will do well and which one will not. But if I had to had to take a call on it, I would say a stock listing outside in America through a SPAC maybe will get a higher valuation than it would get onshore in India. And I think that's why we see a lot more people go outside as well.
Sure. But we're already seeing these new startups announcing their IPOs and shortly hitting the market. But you would suggest that they should go and be doing it in the New York Stock Exchange or some other bourse.
Well, no, I wouldn't like to suggest that, but I think they'll get a higher value if they were to go there. If it's only about valuation, so at the end of the day, it is fair to say that innovation that has happened onshore in India, the people of the country should have access to it. So it would be prudent for these guys to list in India and allow for Indians to subscribe. But if you were to look at it in isolation from a valuation standpoint, they would probably get more money overseas.
Sure. And do you sort of place any bets on Bitcoins as a currency of exchange or as a tool of investment?
I do not. I think if any of the rhetoric from the government over the last month or two is true, regulation is going to affect Bitcoins negatively, at least onshore in India. But no, I haven't. I haven't dwelled in Bitcoins. I've never kind of traded them or anything. So no.
Sure. And what new products are you working on currently in Zerodha and TrueBeacon, which would be very valuable for the trading community and the investing industry?
We're working on something called a nudge, which is kind of a play on a trader's behavior. So if you've had a client who has been on the platform for a year or two, you can decipher a bunch of knowledge about his trading pattern. For example, if he is profitable when he shorts on Friday morning, how that has done over the last 1 year. Stuff like that. So we're trying to develop these insights off of their own trading behavior and kind of nudge them to not do a mistake if they were to be repeating a mistake. It could even be something like if a guy leverages and loses money each time he has leverage on his account, we nudge him and tell him that the last 10 times you took X amount of leverage, it did not work out, so maybe you should not do it again. On the TrueBeacon side, we're launching a bunch of new funds. We have something new in Gift City, which is quite exciting. We have a fund onshore in India, which is a combination of tax-free bonds and large cap equity, which is quite interesting as well. Yeah, so these are some of the new products.
Sure. We're looking forward to them. Absolutely. Alok, are you there?
Yeah, hi Ritu, I'm here.
Okay. So, given what Nikhil has also just said, what kind of new products? So they're already working on the mind of, the trying to understand the behavior patterns of the traders and, how it is that they invest in, what is it that they invest in. How have you sort of predicted these behaviors for people who are taking policies and investing in policies? Any kind of consumer behaviors that you have come across recently?
So, as I mentioned in my earlier response, the way product has evolved in India has been very, very basic. Just to give an example, in car insurance, we still ask only 4 questions. Which year you bought the car, where you bought the car, which city basically, and what is the make model of your car, and did you claim last year? Now, if you don't even ask how many kilometers you drive, who drives the car, where do you park, basic stuff, right? And it's not rocket science. Anyone can think of these things, right? But do you have the right mechanism to first of all price product based on these data inputs? And do you have the whole ecosystem which is working towards this? It's not just the insurance company who needs to think of this and create that whole structure of what questions to ask. Even as distributors or a platform like Policybazaar, we need to ensure that the data which is captured is the right data and which is helping companies come up with these sort of innovative products. So somewhere, I think directionally, yes, industry is headed there, but it won't change very, very quickly. See, in insurance, you have 2 types of products. Something like car insurance usually is called use and file. So you start the product first and then you file it with the regulator. But most of the health and life insurance products is file and use. And each and every product construct takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and you have to get it pre-approved. So yes, every company will pick and choose, okay, which are the 3, 4, 5 products they want to launch this year, and is it the exciting opportunity or not? So yes, a lot of innovation we will see over next few years, but products like say your cycle insurance or pet insurance or job loss insurance, which usually are very Western sort of concepts. I think it will take much longer for those sort of products to come out. I think we're still working on very basic core products.
Sure. We've also got some questions coming from our audience, particularly for the investors. So I'm going to ask this from Ashish and Vaibhav. Is that, what they're asking, that what kind of Indian startups do you think can make their mark across the world? So do you place any bets on edtech or fintech industries for growth or going global from India? You can start with Ashish.
Yeah, I mean, fintech is a bit tough in my view. I mean, because again, fintech is a very big word, right from balance sheet lenders to distribution of third-party financial services products to payments. Given the regulatory landscape, I believe, I mean, whether it's a neobank, I mean, you need to be in your primary geography where you basically hardwire the whole business in line with the regulatory landscape. And payments, etc. I mean, there are already too many players out there. I think one is, I think enterprise SaaS, I think will continue to, like for example, Israel is known for deep tech and security. I think India over the next 10 years could become really a powerhouse when it comes to software. So that's one. I think a bit more on some of the deep tech enabled platforms. I think there's the right kind of talent is out there. And with companies that are, that are going to have, let's say, one leg here and one leg, wherever. I mean, like could be in the Valley or could be in Boston if they're working on something on the health side. So I think that's something that could, grow. I think apart from that, maybe some of the larger Indian startups, in edtech and other geography, other sectors. I mean, they definitely have the capital, the know-how. So some of them will continue to do consolidating acquisitions to bring in new skill sets and, get access to new markets. So those would be the spaces I feel where, Indian startups can make a mark. And I'm talking largely North America. But when it comes to, our neck of the wood, so when you're looking at Southeast Asia and Middle East, I think there are a lot of the large Indian startups which could be in the B2B space or even the B2C space. I think it's much easier for them from a competitive landscape standpoint to come in and kind of capture the market. And so that would be some thoughts from my side.
Sure. Vaibhav, there is another question which is there, which says that incubators, they play a very significant role in the Silicon Valley, in the startup ecosystem. And do you think incubators in India could also play a more active role in nurturing new ideas, and how?
Yeah, no, I think we definitely need a lot of support at the early stages in India, whether it's incubators or accelerators or early stage funds, because I think like you mentioned, the number of startups in India is still minuscule compared to where we could be, right? But then what happens is even now, even at 35,000 startups, the challenge is actually that a good number of them may not make it, right? And when you want to change that percentage, it again goes back to sort of connecting the knowledge gap that might be there between what they're working on and what they could change a little bit to sort of unlock, right? So I think we'll see a lot of incubators and accelerators. We have a few already, but the quality will improve. And I think as operators go back and invest and advise founders, I think that will go a long way as well, in just in terms of sort of bridging the gap. So definitely we'll see different flavors of it. Let's put it that way.
Sure. And there are, of course, some startups who want to reach out to you. So if you can possibly put some kind of a contact email ID or some place that would be helpful for them to actually reach out to you. Amrit, I would love to know if you can tell me, the digital transformation story of SMEs that is currently on the anvil today, and particularly, with global SMEs and Indian SMEs, they're trying to work together in some way. How do you think, particularly in the next 4 to 5 years, how are you envisioning, or what kind of change are you envisioning in it? If you can put it on this scenario in some number terms, or possibly in some overall change of ecosystem terms, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, from a pure digitization lens, like we're looking at a scenario where, yeah, one is from a business model point of view, most of these businesses were pen and paper business. But what is happening is at a super high level, there is a lot of generational turnover in SMEs. Like all the founders started their businesses when in the 80s and they're touching 60, 70 and their children are now taking over. And the way they are used to running businesses are very different from how their parents were. So one is we see that trend in a big way where, the role of software is no longer good to have. It becomes a very must have in terms of how do I record inventory, basic things that large businesses take for granted. But it's slowly moving down the chain where how do I take inventory, how do I take attendance, how do I keep track of my invoices, etc. Those are, let's say, the base layer, and then you build analytics on top of the data that you generate. Like how do I take a better decision using data that I'm generating from the business itself. I don't even need to look out and see how are other companies taking decisions. We see that trend play out in a big way across industries. We have a very horizontal view of manufacturing. But more importantly, the interesting trend that we see, we've talked about being global, and the last 6-7 months we started expanding outside India as a company. Today we have close to 50 customers, most of them in North America, and they're buying from India. These are largely companies who are buying from India for the first time, and what they see is that the Indian manufacturing ecosystem is pretty deep. It's just that they've never had access to the kind of demand that comes their way, and this is across sunrise industries like electric vehicles, medical devices, but also pretty mature industries like aerospace, automotive, etc. So my view is in the next 10 years, especially, we'll see a lot of manufacturing move to India, and the SMEs who will grow faster than the market will be the ones who adopt technology.
Sure. Now, I think this is very helpful. And in fact, the entire discussion has been very sacred in terms of how startups should really plan their growth and how they should really think of building and growing a business for scale in India, and not just think within India, but think outside India too. So thank you to all the members of the panel for joining us here today. It's been very helpful and a wonderful discussion with all of you. And indeed, today's startups are very hungry for the growth and for what lies in the future for them. And I think with your support, they can only see the big growth that they have dreams for and they have ambitions for. Thank you very much for joining us today.